And with those kind of numbers, as you can imagine, Bexar County doctors are concerned as the number of coronavirus patients in the hospital rises again. 67 new patients puts the total number this morning above 1,200. Only 11% of all hospital beds in the county are available now. Erica Zuko is joining us from the medical center. And Erica, what's one of their biggest concerns this morning?
Well, Sarah, they're still watching to see whether people really heeded that public health advice over the 4th of July weekend. They asked people to not have any gatherings with people outside of their immediate household, but we know that some people still did, so they're hoping that those numbers in hospitals just don't go up. They say that right now they're basically at capacity. Officially, they have about 11% of beds available here in San Antonio, but it's not just about the beds, it's also about the staffing. The South Texas Regional Advisory Council, which tracks capacity and monitors hospital conditions, says the risk level is still high. Medical leaders say an influx of nurses and other hospital staff coming in to help from other states and the Department of Defense will help, but that's expected to keep up with the current levels. They say if there is another spike in cases because of people gathering over the 4th of July weekend, it will present problems.
The thing that really concerns us is that we're trying to keep up with the current rate. And if the judge and the mayor's closing of the parks and the actions that they have taken enable to tamp it down and the curve comes back down, will be better. But the thing that is very scary is if the activities over the 4th of July cause another peak beyond this, it will make staffing that much more difficult. So the actions that people are taking will make a huge difference.
And Judge Nelson Wolff says that they are talking with the federal government, hoping to get access to more beds at BAMC. They do have that Freeman Coliseum site set up in the case that they need it, but the idea is to not get there. Live at Medical Center, Erica Zuko, KENS 5 Eyewitness News.